Black woman is arrested, but when cops find out who she is, they turn pale. Monica, an African-American woman, had just finished her shift in Atlanta. Feeling drained but needing a few essentials, she decided to stop by a convenience store. As she stepped inside, the cashier, Sarah, gave her a suspicious look, her eyes following Monica's every move. Monica, weary from her long day, brushed it off. She figured her rumpled clothes and tired expression could be the reason for the unnecessary scrutiny. After all, it wasn't the first time she'd been judged by her appearance. With a deep breath, she continued browsing the aisles, pushing the uncomfortable feeling aside. Outside the store, Officers Daniels and Mitchell sat in a patrol car, monitoring the area. They had received a call from the convenience store, reporting a suspicious person that matched Monica's description. Sarah, the cashier, had mistaken Monica's tired demeanor for something more dangerous, jumping to conclusions based on her own prejudices. The officers, without questioning the validity of the report, were on high alert as they waited, assuming they were about to apprehend someone involved in illicit activity. Monica, unaware of the looming trouble, approached the counter to pay for her items. She noticed Sarah's nervous glances toward the door, but said nothing. Just as Monica handed over her money, the store doors burst open. Officers Daniels and Mitchell stormed in, their hands hovering over their holstered guns, clearly ready for confrontation. "You fit the description of a suspicious individual," Officer Daniels announced, his voice cold and authoritative. Monica, shocked, instinctively reached for her ID to explain. Before she could utter a word, Daniels grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her toward the exit. Her attempts to reason with them fell on deaf ears. "I haven't done anything. I'm just trying to pay for my groceries," Monica protested, her voice steady but filled with frustration. "Save it for later," Officer Mitchell muttered, as he helped Daniels detain her. Refusing to listen, it wasn't until they were processing her information back at the station, checking her ID and running her name, that everything changed. The officers' expressions, once rigid and accusatory, shifted dramatically. Their faces turned pale as the realization hit them Monica was not just any person. She was a prominent civil rights attorney, well known for her work in holding law enforcement accountable for racial profiling and misconduct. She had built a national reputation for fighting cases of police brutality, and the officers had just made the grave mistake of unjustly arresting someone who could turn their careers upside down. Officer Daniel stammered, I had no idea." Monica, calm but sharp, fixed them with a piercing look. "You didn't care to ask, did you?" What had started as a humiliating experience for Monica quickly turned into a moment of reckoning for the officers. They now realized that their actions had put them in a precarious position, facing someone who not only understood the law better than them, but had the power to expose their misconduct to the world. The system they so often used to their advantage could now be used against them. Officer Mitchell, clearly rattled, whispered to his partner, "We're in deep trouble." Monica stood in the dimly lit processing room, her handcuffs clinking against the cold metal table. The officers, who had been so confident a few minutes earlier, now looked nervous, exchanging anxious glances as the weight of their mistake sank in. Officer Daniels, still holding Monica's ID, swallowed hard, the color drained from his face. Monica, however, remained calm. Her years as a civil rights attorney had prepared her for moments like this where power and prejudice collided, and the truth was ignored. She had handled countless cases involving police misconduct, many of which had started with scenarios just like this one. But tonight, it wasn't some client she was defending, it was herself. "Look, Miss Johnson," Officer Daniels began, his voice shaking slightly, "there's clearly been some kind of mistake. We had a report, and we were just following protocol. Monica raised an eyebrow, her voice steady, but laced with controlled anger. "Is it protocol to rough up someone without any evidence? To ignore their explanation? to profile them based on their appearance alone. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their bravado completely gone. Officer Mitchell, visibly sweating, tried to step in. "We didn't know who you were." "We didn't mean," Monica cut him off. "It doesn't matter who I am. It shouldn't matter if I was a lawyer, a janitor, or unemployed. What matters is that you didn't ask any questions. You didn't try to de-escalate the situation. You saw a black woman, and you assumed I was guilty of something." Silence filled the room, the tension palpable. Monica's words hung in the air like a heavy weight, pressing down on the officers. They knew there was no excuse for what they had done, and worse, they knew they were caught. Monica looked from one officer to the other, her eyes unwavering. "This is the exact behavior I've been fighting against my entire career. People like you think you can act without consequence because you wear a badge, but that stops today." Officer Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but Monica continued. "You think you can fix this by apologizing, by saying it was a mistake, but it doesn't work like that. There are real consequences for your actions, and not just for me, for every person you've done this to before, and will do this to again if something doesn't change." Officer Mitchell, now pale with fear, stammered, "We can work this out. We can." Monica shook her head. "I'm filing a formal complaint. I'll make sure that the department, the city, and the community know exactly what happened tonight." Daniels and Mitchell stood frozen, realizing that this would not end quietly. Monica's reputation, her platform, and her experience with cases of racial injustice meant that this would likely turn into a full-blown legal battle, one that could not only tarnish their careers, but also draw national attention to their department's practices. The station's captain, alerted by the commotion, entered the room. He took one look at the officers' faces, and then at Monica, who stood tall and unflinching. "What's going on here?" the captain demanded, sensing the gravity of the situation. Monica didn't wait for the officers to speak. She calmly recounted the events, from the moment she entered the store to the moment they grabbed her, without asking any questions. The captain's face grew more serious with every word, and he quickly realized the depth of the mess they were in. "Miss Johnson, I assure you we will investigate this immediately," the captain said, trying to regain some control. "This is not how we conduct ourselves, and I'll personally make sure these officers are held accountable." Monica crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "I'll make sure of that myself. I expect the formal report on my desk by tomorrow morning, and I'll be taking legal action regardless of what your investigation uncovers." The captain nodded stiffly, recognizing that there was no room for negotiation. Monica wasn't just another person they could brush aside. She was a force of change, and now the department was about to face the consequences of years of unchecked bias and misconduct. As Monica was finally released from the handcuffs, she glanced back at the officers, who still stood pale and speechless, and said, "This is just the beginning." Then she turned and walked out of the station, her resolve stronger than ever. The next day, the story broke, headlines across the city, and soon, the nation ran articles about the wrongful arrest of Monica Johnson, the renowned civil rights attorney. The incident sparked protests, calling for police reform and an end to racial profiling. It was no longer just about Monica's arrest. It was about a system that allowed these kinds of injustices to continue. Monica's case became a rallying point, a moment where the community came together to demand change. And as the legal battles began, one thing was clear: Monica wasn't fighting this fight alone. In the days following Monica's arrest, the city of Atlanta became a hotbed of discussions, protests, and demands for justice. News outlets, both local and national, covered the story extensively. People who had experienced similar treatment by law enforcement felt empowered to speak out. The incident involving Monica wasn't just an isolated event. It was a reflection of systemic racial bias that had long plagued the community. Monica, back at her office, received a flood of support from colleagues, activists, and everyday citizens. Civil rights groups offered legal assistance, But Monica was more than capable of handling the case herself. Still, she welcomed the solidarity, knowing that this wasn't just her fight, it was a fight for everyone who had ever been marginalized or mistreated by the system. Days turned into weeks, and as Monica prepared to file her lawsuit, the police department scrambled to contain the damage. They issued public apologies, suspended the officers involved, and launched internal investigations. However, for many, these actions felt like surface-level attempts to placate the public. Monica knew better. Real change required more than apologies. It required accountability. As the lawsuit moved forward, Monica held press conferences, speaking not just about her own experience, but about the broader issue of racial profiling and police misconduct. "This is not just about what happened to me," she said during one such conference. "This is about what happens to black and brown people in this country every day. We can't keep letting fear and bias dictate how our communities are policed. It's time for real reform." The community rallied behind her. Protests outside the police station grew in size, with signs reading *Justice for Monica *and *End Police Brutality*. What started as a local matter quickly gained national attention. Celebrities and political figures voiced their support for Monica, calling for systemic change. In the midst of all this, Monica met with city leaders, including the mayor and the police chief. She demanded concrete reforms, mandatory de-escalation training, body cameras on all officers, and a civilian oversight committee to review cases of police misconduct. While some city officials were resistant, the mounting pressure from the public left them with little choice but to listen. Monica's lawsuit was filed, naming the police officers, the department, and the city as defendants. It sought not only financial compensation for her wrongful arrest, but also specific changes in police policy and accountability measures. The case quickly became symbolic of a larger struggle for justice, not just in Atlanta, but across the country. As the court date approached, Monica continued her work. But this case felt different, more personal, more urgent. The weight of her community's hopes and frustrations rested on her shoulders, but she was ready. Meanwhile, officers Daniels and Mitchell had been suspended without pay, awaiting the results of the department's investigation. Their once certain futures in law enforcement were now in jeopardy, and they faced possible criminal charges for their actions. Daniels, in particular, was grappling with the consequences of that night. He had been trained to follow protocol, but somewhere along the way, his biases had clouded his judgment. Late one evening, Officer Daniels, unable to sleep, found himself driving past the protesters gathered outside the police station. The sight of them, young, old, black, white, waving signs and chanting for justice, struck something deep within him. He parked his car and sat in the dark, watching. He had never seen himself as a racist or a bad cop, but now he was forced to confront the reality that his actions had been part of a much larger problem. The faces of the protesters haunted him, as did the look in Monica's eyes when she had asked him, "You didn't care to ask, did you?" The trial became a media spectacle, with journalists covering every development. In the courtroom, Monica presented a powerful case, detailing not only her own experience, but also citing countless other cases of racial profiling by the police department. Witnesses testified about the culture of bias within the force, how officers routinely made assumptions based on race and ignored proper protocol. The defense, representing the city and the officers, attempted to argue that the police were acting on a legitimate call about a suspicious person, but Monica dismantled that argument piece by piece. "A call doesn't excuse misconduct," she said in her closing statement. "A badge doesn't give anyone the right to violate a person's rights. This isn't just about me. It's about justice. And it's about ensuring that this doesn't happen to the next person who walks into that store, tired from a long day." After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. The entire city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the verdict. When the jury returned, their decision was clear: Monica won the case. The officers were found guilty of misconduct, and the city was ordered to pay damages. More importantly, the court mandated the police department to implement the reforms Monica had called for, including the creation of an independent review board and the overhaul of officer training procedures. The victory was monumental. Crowds outside the courthouse erupted in cheers, chanting Monica's name. But for Monica, it wasn't just about winning a case, it was about sending a message. That night, as she stood on the courthouse steps addressing the crowd, she spoke with the same resolve she had carried throughout the ordeal. "This is only the beginning," she said, her voice echoing through the streets. "We've won today, but the fight for justice continues. We will keep pushing, keep holding those in power accountable, and keep demanding change until everyone, no matter their race, no matter their background, can walk into a store, into a neighborhood, into this world, without fear." Monica's victory became a catalyst for broader movements across the country. Other cities began examining their own police practices, and activists used her case as a rallying cry for reform. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a turning point in the ongoing struggle for racial justice. And Monica, having faced down the very system she had spent her career fighting, emerged as an even more powerful advocate for change. And as she walked away from the courthouse that night, surrounded by supporters and allies, Monica knew that this victory, though hard one, was only one chapter in a much larger story, a story that she would continue to help write.